I have my own way of introducing myself, and that is to get my audience to introduce themselves. So I'm going to find out some important stuff. What I want to do is I'm going to give you 5 different ways of loving God, and then I'm going to have you vote on the one that is most natural to you. We're going to vote with our eyes wide open, holding up our hands so everybody can see, and that way we'll have a pretty good idea about who's out here spiritually. Okay, so I'll go through all 5 ways first, and then I'll give you a chance to vote. 5 ways of loving God. Number 1, there are those people who love God primarily with their minds. These are the thinking Christians. Guess what their favorite spiritual activity is?
Thinking.
Bible study. Serious Bible study. These are the people who wouldn't be caught dead going into a class called relationships. They're manly men, you know. If they have to choose between the class on loneliness and Leviticus, they'll choose Leviticus every time. They are serious Bible students. These are the guys who have learned to read Greek and can't figure out why the rest of you haven't. You do not have to read Greek to get to heaven, but you won't be able to talk to anybody when you get there. Number 2, there are the service Christians. This first group loves God primarily with their heads. This group loves God with their hands. They're the ones who mow the lawns and put in the light bulbs and do the work. And they're the ones who clear the tables. They're the servant Christians. Number 3, there are the relational Christians. Their solution to every problem is, let's have a party. These are the people who plan the retreats and the fellowship meetings. If they are ever by themselves for 10 minutes, their head will explode. You know, they've got to have people around them all the time. It's the relational Christians. Number 4, there are the contemplative or prayerful Christians. These are the people whose favorite spiritual activity is to pray. If you give them the choice between coming to a retreat like this or going off by themselves under a tree to pray, they'll go pray every time. And you often don't know who these people are in your church because they're not very visible, because they're always off praying somewhere. And it's really interesting. Often the mightiest prayer warriors in a church are people that you're fairly unaware of because they're always back there praying somewhere. And finally, number 5, there are the emotive Christians. These are the Christians who primarily love God with their feelings, and there are like 3 of these left in churches of Christ. We have systematically for years been hunting them down and killing them. Perhaps 2 or 3 have escaped. And what they want is, they want us to have some enthusiasm. Okay, now we're getting ready to vote. Everybody ready to vote? You're going to identify with the one that is most natural to you. Now, there's no fair saying, I am perfectly balanced on all, just like Jesus. We're not buying it. Okay. We're not buying it. Okay, so let's start out with a moment of honesty, shall we? Okay, those of you who say, I'm basically an intellectual Christian, I'm a thinking Christian, I study the Bible. Okay. There's always a bunch of those in churches of Christ. Although I went to a little renegade church of Christ, and in a group about this size, there was only one thinking Christian. I said, you had better protect this guy. He is the only thing standing between you and heresy. Study the Bible, he's the only guy that had one. Okay, intellectual Christian. Number 2, service Christians. You're probably going to be out there doing things, working for people. Okay. Number 3, relational Christians. All right, there's always quite a few of those. Number 4, contemplative Christians. Yeah, there's always 2 or 3, but it's hard to get them to raise their hands because they're in prayer. Yeah, there really are very few of those out there. And number 5, the emotive Christians. Raise both hands and wave. Still a few of those left. Now, of course, one of the problems is what we tend to do is read spirituality through the eyes of our own wiring. And then what we do is we kind of despise everybody who's not wired like us. So the servant Christian says, if we could just get those thinking Christians to get their nose out of the Bible, get those praying Christians off their knees and out here to actually do some work, we'd have some spirituality here. And the praying Christians are thinking, if we could just get those people to quit running around and get on their knees and start praying, we'd have some spirituality here. And those thinking Christians are thinking, if we could just get these people to actually study the Bible in a serious way, we'd have some spirituality here. And the emotive Christians are waving their hands. Okay. Amen. But of course, the church is very blessed to have all those kinds of people in it, and how impoverished we would be if we didn't. And the kind of well-rounded spiritual life happens when we try to develop all of those ways of loving God in whatever degree we can, even though we're not going to all do them in the same way, because we're not wired the same way. I want you to kind of keep that in the back of your mind, because I am going to kind of take you down a different trail, but we're just going to let that kind of sit there for a moment. I want to tell you about a conversation. I'm going to disguise it somewhat, because I have discovered how small a pond I swim in. And the chances of you knowing any of the people involved in the story I'm getting ready to tell are very small, but I want to be careful. So I'll disguise the names. And trust if you do recognize this, that you'll protect me. I had a student some years ago who we'll call Jim. I developed a great relationship with Jim because he had one of those things in students I really liked. He was brilliant. And I suppose I have taught more brilliant students, but none come immediately to mind. He graduated from Harvard Law School. He was on fast track to partnership. I suppose $250,000 to $500,000 a year. In spite making all of that money, was a really good guy. Married a wonderful, wonderful woman. They have 2 children, a boy and a girl. It is sort of the exemplary family. It's the exemplary life. So, not before last, my phone rings a little after midnight. And that always alarms me, because my stepmother is dying of Lou Gehrig's disease, and I'm thinking, okay, here we go. But it's Jim's parents, who I've come to know through the years, wonderful people. They're in tears, and they start to relate to me a story I already know, but they need to talk about it. Because something extraordinary has happened. It's just so unbelievable. Jim has gotten deeply involved in a cult. And here is this brilliant, accomplished guy. If you ever thought there was a guy who would never fall for this sort of stuff, it's Jim. But he's not just involved in a cult, he has fallen down the rabbit hole. His values have completely changed. He doesn't talk to his friends anymore. I haven't communicated with him for probably 4 months. We used to talk pretty regularly. He doesn't talk with his parents much anymore. His values have just shifted, and they're even talking about old-fashioned deprogramming sort of stuff. And they're in tears because they just cannot figure out what has happened to their son. Well, most of you are well ahead of me and realize I've entirely made up that story. And in doing so, have described to you what it was like to become a Christian in the first century. And if, like the book of 1 Peter is to be believed, the story I've told you is highly accurate. Values have changed. Friends have changed. They've gotten caught up in this cult, and who knows about these Christians? They appear to be engaging in sexual orgies. They call them love feasts. We know they're incestuous. They call each other brother and sister. They might be cannibals, body and blood. And this guy who had this really kind of great career going in the pagan world has suddenly started to withdraw and doesn't do the same sort of things, and they think the guy has lost his mind. It's my definition of manly men. And after becoming sort of irrelevant for about 1,700 years, since Christians ran the world, the kind of story I told you is getting ready to become relevant again. As Christianity starts to get pushed to the margins, and we're no longer the power brokers in our society, we're getting ready to sort things out. Okay, so let's see how hard I can push this weekend. I'm going to read 3 texts, basically, and I'm going to try to listen to these texts carefully, 1 from the Old Testament, 2 from the New. I'm going to be as practical as I can, and let's see what it looks like to be God's man in our world. First text is going to be 1 Kings chapter 19.